How is it possible that a driver like Lewis Hamilton with a competitive Ferrari in his hands ends up completely out of the fight for a simple touch in the first corner? Because what Frédéric Vasseur revealed after Miami 2026 completely changes history. Hamilton was losing half a second per lap throughout the race, and that is not a detail, it is a sentence. But the most shocking thing is not just the damage. It is understanding how that blow turned a car capable of fighting at the top into one condemned to survive on the track. The 2026 Miami Grand Prix didn't start like just any race for Lewis Hamilton. It started with the feeling that Ferrari finally had something serious on its hands. There was rhythm, there was balance in the car, and, above all, there was a real opportunity to fight in the upper area, something that had not always been guaranteed at this start of the stage. Everything pointed to the fact that this could be the weekend where we would really see the full potential of the SF26. But in Formula One, everything can change in a matter of seconds. And so it was. The start, as usually happens in Miami, was chaotic. Traffic, positions on the limit, aggressive movements. And in the midst of this scenario, Hamilton managed to avoid a first major problem in the initial corner, avoiding a more serious incident in front of him. But that evasive movement left him completely exposed, poorly positioned, entering an area where any slightest mistake or contact could have consequences. And there appeared the breaking point, the touch that changed everything. That contact was not spectacular for the spectator, it was not an accident that caused a red flag or an immediate abandonment. It was much more treacherous than that. It was a silent blow, the kind that doesn't end the race in the moment, but slowly condemns it over the next 57 laps. From that moment on, Hamilton's Ferrari was no longer the car that had shown competitive potential during the weekend. What came next was a complete transformation of the car's behavior. The damage directly affected critical areas of the aerodynamic flow, especially on the side and floor of the car, fundamental parts for generating load and stability. And this is where the data that changes everything comes in, the one that turns this incident into something much bigger than it seems. Because as Frédéric Vasseur revealed, Hamilton was not losing a few tenths. He was losing around half a second per lap. Half a second per lap in Formula One is an eternity. It's the difference between attacking and defending, between putting pressure on the car in front or simply watching it escape without being able to do anything. And most importantly, it is a constant loss, impossible to recover with talent or strategy. From that moment on, the race stopped depending on what Hamilton could do behind the wheel, and began to depend on how much damage he could manage without making things worse. On a technical level, the problem was even deeper than it seems. By losing downforce in that area, the car was not only slower in corners, it also became unstable. The balance was broken, the rear axle began to suffer more than necessary, and that generated a chain effect. Greater tire wear, less traction, and a total inability to maintain a sustained competitive pace. And this is where the drama of this story really begins. Because Hamilton didn't quit. He didn't retire. He stayed on the track, fighting lap after lap with a car that was no longer in a position to compete at the level that the race demanded. While others fought for positions, he was trapped in a kind of limbo, without rhythm to advance, but with just enough to stay within the points. A completely conditioned race where the objective stopped being to gain positions and became to survive. The hardest thing of all is that this was not just a bad race. It was a missed opportunity. Because before the incident, Ferrari had something to fight with. And that's what makes this case so important to the season. It's not just the end result, it's what we never get to see. And right here is where the story gets even more interesting. Because understanding the damage is only the first step. The next thing is to discover how exactly that half a second per lap destroyed any strategic option that Ferrari could have had. From that moment on, Lewis Hamilton's career enters a completely different phase, a phase where we are no longer talking about competing, but about resisting. Because losing half a second per lap not only affects the speed, it affects absolutely the entire ecosystem of the race. Strategy, tires, pace, overtaking. Everything falls apart piece by piece without there being a real solution from the wall. The first thing that breaks is the strategy. Under normal conditions, Ferrari would have had multiple scenarios to play the race. Undercut, overcut, tire management, pressure on direct rivals. But with that damage, all those options automatically disappear. Because when you're losing half a second per lap, any attempt at strategy is neutralized before it starts. You can stop earlier, you can stop later, you can try to lengthen the stint. But you will always rejoin the track slower than the others. And here comes a key point that often goes unnoticed: dirty air. A car with aerodynamic damage suffers even more when it rolls behind other cars. What was already a loss of performance in clean air is multiplied when you enter traffic. This means that Hamilton was not only slower, but he also had no real tools for overtaking, getting stuck in positions where he normally would have been able to make progress. But the hardest blow comes not only from the lack of pure rhythm, but from the impact on the tires. When you lose downforce in critical areas of the car, especially on the floor and sides, the balance of the car is broken. The rear axle begins to slide more, the car loses stability when cornering, and this generates much more aggressive degradation of the tires. What was once a manageable stint now becomes a constant nightmare where each lap degrades performance further. This forces Hamilton to completely change his way of driving. You can no longer attack corners like before, you can no longer trust the car in fast areas, and each corner exit becomes an exercise in control rather than speed. You are driving around the problem, not with the car. And that difference, although not always seen on television, is brutal in terms of performance. This is where Frédéric Vasseur's revelation takes on even more weight. Because we are not talking about a driver's perception or a post-race excuse. We are talking about real data from the team that confirms that the car was outside the optimal performance window throughout the test. And while all this is happening, the race continues to move forward. Leaders set their pace, strategies evolve, positions change, but Hamilton remains completely disconnected from that dynamic. He is in a kind of parallel race, where his reference is no longer the cars in front, but the limits of a damaged car. The most interesting and at the same time most frustrating thing is that at certain moments you could see the pure talent trying to make up for the deficit. There were laps where I managed to minimize losses, where it seemed like I could maintain an acceptable pace. But it was always temporary. Because the problem did not disappear, the problem was built into the car. And this is where this case leaves a very clear lesson about modern Formula One. When you lose aerodynamic performance structurally, there are no miracles. There is no strategy that will save it. There is no piloting that will compensate for it in the long term. You can limit damage, yes, but you can't change the fate of the race. And just when it seems that everything is lost, when the race is already completely conditioned, that is when the most important moment arrives. Understanding what this result really means not only for the race in Miami but for the entire panorama of Ferrari and Hamilton in the season. And this is where the whole story changes dimension, because what happened to Lewis Hamilton in Miami 2026 stops being simply a bad race and becomes a direct warning about how fragile performance can be in modern Formula One. Because when he crossed the finish line in 7th position, the cold result may seem discreet, even acceptable within a complicated weekend. But when you understand the full context, when you know that he was losing half a second a lap from the first lap, that 7th place takes on a completely different meaning. It is not just any result. It is, in reality, the maximum possible within a completely limited scenario. This is where the figure of Frédéric Vasseur comes in again, because his revelation not only explains what happened, it redefines how we should interpret the entire race. Ferrari did not fail in strategy, it did not fail in base pace, it was not naturally overtaken by its rivals. Ferrari lost this race in the first corner, at that moment where the damage turned a competitive car into one incapable of fighting. And this has much bigger implications than it seems. Because in a season where the differences are minimal, where the margins between teams are measured in tenths, losing half a second per lap is not just losing a race. It is losing a key opportunity in the championship. These are points that do not come back, it is ground that other teams gain, it is pressure that accumulates. But there is something even more important that this episode leaves behind. And it is confirmation that Ferrari, at least at this point in the season, did have the potential. Before the incident, the car was in a position to compete, to be in the conversation, to fight higher up. And that completely changes the narrative. Because we are no longer talking about a team that is far away, but rather about one that, due to external circumstances, could not show what it really had. For Hamilton, these types of races are especially tough. Not because he lacks personal performance, not because he has made mistakes, but because he knows perfectly well what he had in his hands. He knows there was a real opportunity, and it was gone in seconds. Still, his ability to stay on track, manage damage and salvage points demonstrates exactly why he remains one of the most complete drivers on the grid. But the big question that all this leaves is not what happened, but what could have happened. Because if that contact does not occur, if that damage never exists, we are talking about a completely different career. A scenario where Ferrari could have been fighting higher up, where Hamilton could have been a real protagonist, where the final result would have told another story. Because what Frédéric Vasseur revealed leaves no room for doubt. Losing half a second per lap is not a technical detail, it is an absolute condemnation. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.